All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm back here with author and historian Dan Korn tonight. He's going to have some story time with us. Got a couple of generals he's going to tell us about. We're going to start off and do one of my favorite, General George Thomas. Dan, you want to tell us a little bit about him?
Well, let's talk about first about the fact that Thomas had a ton of nicknames.
Okay.
Everybody knows the nickname Rock of Chickamauga, but they also called him the Sledge of Nashville because of what he did at Nashville. Pat Thomas, because his men felt that he really did care about them as much as they thought he did. And Slow Trot Thomas, or Old Slow Trot. And he got that nickname from his early cavalry days of training troops, training new cavalry officers. Because he said they had a tendency to ride their horses too fast at West Point and really break the animals down. And he was always trying to teach them to take it easy, take it easy, take it easy with your horses. So that was, the guy had a ton of nicknames, but of course the one he's most remembered for is Rock of Chickamauga. One of the things that most people do not know about him, of course, is the fact that, well, they know he was a Virginian, but they don't know that he survived Nat Turner's rebellion.
Really?
Yes, his plantation was one of the ones that was hit. His parents were of French Huguenot ancestry. They had a plantation at Newsom's Depot, Southampton County, Virginia, about 5 miles from the North Carolina coast border, And his father was of Welsh descent. Mom was a Huguenot. And he had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. So, yeah, a fairly good-sized family. They had an upper-class plantation lifestyle until the father was seriously injured and died following a farming accident. And after that, it kind of made the family a little tougher for the family. They owned over 600 acres of land. And at one time, they had about 24, 25 slaves. So they had a pretty good lifetime. Now, Dad passes when he is 13. And that left the family in a relatively rough time. And then, of course, they were forced to flee from their home. They hid first in a root cellar, then in the swamps during Nat Turner's rebellion because their plantation was one of the plantations that was raided by Nat Turner. So that was one of those stories. And some people, of course, look at the way how that was handled. Of course, Turner was destroyed, basically, when they executed him, his body. But Thomas did not look at it the same way as other people did. Whereas they were looking at it, they wanted revenge. They wanted, they were angry and upset. He was also upset, but he wanted, to him, it was a different thing. It was, why? Why did this happen? What kind of thing did you see in a way, as far as controlling blacks were concerned, that slavery was necessarily needed? Now, he was not opposed to slavery, but in fact, he had about 15 of them of his own. But he did things that would necessarily endear him to other slave owners. For example, he taught somewhere around 15 or so of his slaves how to read and write, which violated Virginia law. So that was not something he was like to do. And his father did not approve of that, but he did it anyway. But he just felt that this whole idea that the contented slave and the benevolent slave owner was a sentimental myth. So in that sense, he was quite different from other Virginians of his class, okay? He was appointed to the United States Military Academy. He was, in 1836, so he was a relatively youthful student. Now, the guy who appointed him to it was John Mason. And that is, of course, the Mason-Dixon line.
Wow.
And he warned him at the time that no nominee of his had ever graduated successfully from West Point. Well, of course, yes, George Thomas was bound and determined he was not going to continue that trend. And he was 20 years old when he went in, and his fellow cadets called him Old Tom to start with. But the guy he became an instant friend with and was his roommate, which was William Tecumseh Sherman.
Huh.
They were roommates, and he was actually a very good student. He made cadet officer his second year. He graduated 12th in a class of 42 in 1840, and he was appointed as a second lieutenant in the United States Artillery, 3rd U.S. Artillery. So he was definitely a student of distinction, because your best students usually first went into the engineering corps, and then into artillery, then cavalry, and then infantry. So, which is kind of interesting, because Grant, who was in the middle of his class, was an artilleryman.
Okay, that is interesting.
So, but he didn't make it. He actually fought somewhat in the Seminole Wars for a while. He was in Fort Lauderdale for a while. That was about the only time he actually had infantry duty. But then he went to a different post. He was in New Orleans for a while. He was stationed at Fort Moultrie for a while in Charleston Harbor. That was, of course, before Fort Sumter was built, and Fort McHenry in Baltimore. And when the Mexican War began to loom, his regiment was then, of course, ordered to Texas. And he would lead a gun crew during the war. He would serve the distinction with the war, the battles of, he had Fort Brown, Resaca de Palma. He was at Monterey. He was at Buena Vista. He received 3 brevet promotions during the course of the war. So he was a busy boy. And in fact, General Taylor commended him and his artillery for their always being there when they needed them, kind of thing. So he did a really good job with all of this. It's interesting in that he served very closely with one particular artillery officer during most of the war. And that was a gentleman by the name of, another captain by the name of Braxton Bragg. They both served a great deal together in the course of the war. So I find that interesting, knowing that he obviously had a good feel for what Bragg was all about later on in the course of the war when they meet again in the Civil War. So he's got an idea what he's going on. He went to Florida. He was reassigned to Florida for a short while, but then they sent him back to West Point. He became a cavalry and artillery instructor at West Point and became a very close friend of Robert E. Lee, who was superintendent at this point. The two men had a very close personal relationship. Part of the reason why he got the recommendation to become an instructor at West Point was Braxton Bragg. Braxton Bragg wrote a recommendation for him to go to West Point and teach, which, again, I find is kind of interesting. One of the things he immediately took into consideration when he got there was the very poor condition of the Academy's horses. You could see what the riders were doing, the tendency of the cadets, particularly a certain cadet by the name of Jeb Stewart and others, to kind of override the horses. And this is where the nickname came up of Old Slow Trot Thomas, because of the fact that he ordered these men to take it easy on their horses. Jeb Stewart being one, another one being Fitzhugh Lee. So these young men were going to become, of course, prominent Confederate cavalry generals, but they originally trained under Pap Thomas. So another one that had a strong connection to him was someone he actually had something to do with in terms of the expulsion of this particular cadet from West Point for disciplinary reasons, and that was John Schofield.
Wow.
Who, of course, is going to command troops under him at the Battle of Franklin and block the Confederates from getting to Nashville sooner, giving Thomas more time to prepare. Schofield did not like Thomas at all. In fact, when later on after the war, when he was writing his memoirs, Thomas never wrote his, but when Schofield was writing his memoirs, he did not speak very highly of Thomas in those memoirs. So there was obviously probably a personal grudge that was involved in this whole situation. Now, it is during this time period that he will meet his wife. This is Frances Lucretia Kellogg, and she is from Troy, New York. He met her while he was stationed at West Point. They fell in love, it is very likely that one of the biggest reasons he did not side with the Confederacy during the Civil War was because of the fact of his wife. Really? So I am sure that has something to do with it. I'm sure that it had to have something to do with it. Just like John Pemberton, who was from Pennsylvania originally, had married a Southern girl and decided to fight for the Confederacy. Thomas had the other side of the coin.
And that general who was the highest-ranking Confederate officer.
I'm sorry?
The general who was the highest-ranking Confederate officer, he was from New York, too, I believe. It moved to Virginia. What was his name?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, as they were advancing closer and closer to Atlanta. And when Hood replaces Johnson, which, by the way, Sherman was extremely happy about that fact, that it was now Hood, not Johnson anymore. It is Thomas's defenses at Peachtree Creek that severely damaged Hood's army in its very first attempt to break that siege of Atlanta. So he doesn't do the job. When Sherman starts his march to the sea, and of course, he abandons his lines of communication. Thomas's troops stay behind in order to keep Hood occupied. And of course, that's where you're going to have the infamous Franklin-Nashville campaign. That's going to take place from this point on. Thomas has a smaller force than does Hood to reach Nashville, but he's going to receive reinforcements once he gets to Nashville. And they were bound and determined they were not going to let Nashville be taken. Just prior to that, of course, is the Battle of Franklin. The day the generals died, basically, is because you have 13 Confederate generals who will either be killed, seriously wounded, or missing in that battle. One, of course, being the Stonewall in the West, Pat Claiborne, who was killed in the height of the fight, who had told them they were damn fools. Hood, that he was damn fool that he even attempted to try to do this. This, of course, is under Schofield, who is one of Rosecrans' subordinates during this fight. And it is a serious, serious defeat. I don't know how many people realize, everyone's heard of Gettysburg and, of course, Pickett's charge. But Hood's charge, or whatever you want to call it, at Franklin was twice as wide a line, or long a line, as was Pickett's at Gettysburg. The fight didn't last for just an hour or two. It went on for 5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, because what they were attempting to do was there were defensive fortifications that had been dug by the Confederates there at Franklin using slave labor for the most part. The Union troops utilized them, just more or less used them backward. And as a result of that, held off the Confederate forces during the fighting at Franklin long enough for everybody to get back across the river and move on to Nashville. So part of the reason why this was so important was because when Thomas gets to Nashville, he's actually getting troops from all over the place. He had men that were coming from all parts of the West. And a lot of these guys were really young still. He even had quartermaster employees that were being put in there as infantry people. He refused to attack until his army was ready. And he also had a good excuse in the sense that the ice that was covering the ground was really bad. I mean, they had some serious weather conditions that they were dealing with, sleet-type conditions. Grant didn't care. Grant kept sending them orders to get going, get going, get going, and Thomas kept sending them back. I will when we can. I will when we can. When I'm ready and when we can. See, to Grant, this sounds like McClellan all over again. Okay? But it's not. Thomas is doing the right thing. He's trying to get his men ready to go. He's ready to rock and roll. Grant is getting ticked off as all heck with him. He sends Major General John Logan out in order to replace him. In fact, he started himself headed there from City Point because he was going to take command in person over the whole thing. He doesn't even get there, obviously never gets anywhere near that because by that point, the Battle of Nashville is going to take place. And Thomas is absolutely going to destroy Hood's army in those 2 days. Absolutely destroys it. The Army of Tennessee is ripped to shreds by the time they're done with the Battle of Nashville. In fact, Thomas, he didn't write a lot of letters, but when he did, the one concerning this, he sent to his wife. And in it, he said, "We have whipped the enemy, taken many prisoners, and considerable artillery." That's all he said. He did a lot more than he ruined the Army of Tennessee. I mean, Hood is done. There's nothing, very little left for him to command. And as a result of that, he is going to be appointed a major general, or Thomas, in the regular army. People don't understand there was a difference between being a general, a major general, this, that, and other thing, brevet ranks over volunteers, as opposed to the regular army. That's the reason why Custer and those guys, even though they had been generals during the war, reverted to lower ranks afterwards for the regular army, because they were brevets or temporary rankings. So he's going to hold this. He's still a little annoyed about when he gets his promotion. He's promoted to major general, but he's kind of annoyed because the dating of the promotion puts him junior to Sheridan, and Sheridan had once been junior to him, so he wasn't too crazy about that. But he let it go. He said, "Okay, I've earned it. I've done it." And this, of course, is when he gets the nickname of Sledge of Nashville. So he's got old slow trot, old pap, old this, old that, and so on and so forth. Heck of a commander. In my opinion, an extremely underrated combat commander. Extremely underrated. In fact, there have been times where I've been strongly tempted to say that he was the best Union general, at least in the West, if not the whole war. Of course, you'll get an argument from people about that one regarding Grant, of course, and Sherman as well. The only time Thomas ever lost a fight, and it really wasn't his fault, was Chickamauga. Okay, I mean, he won and won and won and won some. So, at the end of the war, he's commanding the Department of the Cumberland, which is, of course, Kentucky and Tennessee, sometimes part of West Virginia, Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. He is, during Reconstruction, he will act to protect freedmen from white abuse, set up military commissions to try to enforce labor contracts, to help out the blacks, because the local courts either didn't operate anymore or were biased. And he used troops to help break up the Klan. He never felt that whole idea of the Klan was a proper idea. He said, as people said, that they were trying to put them in a positive light. He never did that. Johnson offered him the rank of lieutenant general, the intent to eventually replace Grant. Thomas turned it down. He said, "No, withdraw my name. I don't want to be a party to politics." This was the second time he had done this, or at least the second time. He wanted the military division of the Pacific. He was granted the command of that. The Presidio is where his headquarters were. And on March 28th, while writing an article in response to Schofield's criticisms of him, he had a stroke at his desk, and he died. None of his blood relatives attended his funeral. They had never forgiven him for his loyalty to the Union, and he was buried in New York at Oakwood Cemetery. Actually, that's in Troy, New York. Not that far away from West Point. 1870.
Oh, okay. So he didn't live long at all after the war.
He's only 53 years old when he passes.
53.
Yeah, he's only 53 years old. So, good man. Yeah, he moved slowly, yes, because he had an injured back, and it hurt to walk. But mentally, that man was anything but slow. He was just very methodical. And his judgment was always accurate. And he had a thorough knowledge of his profession. And once he grasped a problem and figured it all out, he knew when the time would be right for action, and he would strike like a rattlesnake. There was absolutely no doubt of that with that man.
What a great story.
Pardon?
I said, what a great story. I didn't know a lot of this about him.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just the way he was. again, he didn't publish his own memoirs. He never had a chance to write them, and I don't think he would have anyway. He was just not that way. He was not someone who was looking for publicity. Of all the generals at the top of the heap, he would be the guy that you would have the least amount of quotes about or quotes from. That just wasn't his style. Okay.
All right. Is there anything you want to add about him before we come back and do another one?
Like as I said, he's one of my favorites. I have immense respect for him. I mean, it took courage, true courage on his part, to turn his back on his native, soil, which all these other Virginians were saying, how can you turn your back on your native soil? But he didn't see it that way. He saw it as, no, my native soil is the United States. I took an oath to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and he kept his oath. So I have to give him a lot of credit for that. Great soldier. So,
all right, that was a great story.